The weight of the motor with a factory oil pan is 275 pounds, and it is a short motor. It is very compact. The balance shafts are mid-block, so they're above the crank, I believe. And it's very easy to modify, make an oil pan for, and then stuff it underneath the hood of a tiny car.
Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by DeechWorks Fuel Systems. Visit DeechWorks.com for all your fuel system needs. On this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we're going to talk about the Ecotec. You guys leave me all the K-Series motors, please. Stop swapping them into everything under the sun and consider something else. Since I need help talking General Motors stuff, joining me, Lemons racer, pick and pull aficionado, Ecotec entrepreneur, Cameron. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks, Con. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. This is another Blame Mario podcast for all those that are out there. Mario was like, hey, meet this person. So I think Mario's pushed more business my way than I've been able to push his way. So maybe I need to fix that. But yeah, anyway, so I've got the rant out of the way about the K-Series stuff, and I literally know nothing about the Ecotec. But before we get into that, let's get your background in racing, please.
Sure. So I've been racing for about 10 years. It started with buying somebody else's, quote, big air quotes, ready to race Miata out of California and having it shipped across the country to Michigan.
There's never anything wrong with a car that you bought across the country.
Well, it had a cage in it. Let's put it that way. And it had some wiring that would resemble passing Lemons Tech inspection. Okay. And I know you've probably heard a little bit about Lemons Tech. It's pretty stringent. There's cars that I know that come from other series that can't pass Lemons Tech. And so when we first got the car, we actually paired up with a guy who's a friend of mine now and had been doing lemons for quite some time. And he kind of crawled all over the car. And he really helped lessen that learning curve of how to go racing, because we knew nothing. I think I'd been around a track one time in a Boss 302 track package car, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing in that car at all at the time. I learned a lot since then, but the car came from California. We had a lot of prep work to do, and it's just been a devolving disaster ever since then. Fixing things, as you know, anybody who's an endurance racer knows, it's kind of an always thing, as most track people do. But endurance, we seem to just break everything all the time. And so we did that with a Miata motor and little 1.6 motor to start, switched to a 1.8, blew that up, put in another 1.8, blew that up, blew up some other Miata components like 1.6 differentials. Again, we knew very little about the platform, and we learned very quickly what was going to work and what wasn't. Mm-hmm. And I kind of got sick of trying to find Miata motors in the junkyard, because Lemons, at least the spirit of Lemons, now I'll get to how I feel about that here in just a second, but the spirit of Lemons is that you're trying to do it on a shoestring. The whole idea behind it is Halloween meets gasoline, so you've got themes and everything else, but really the objective is to air quotes, to have a $500 car. Now, that $500 car kind of went out the door several years ago because we all wanted to go faster. And the speed creep inside that series has gotten kind of intense. But came across
not
the
to mention
Ecotec.
inflation.
Yeah. Junkyard inflation too. Like
right.
You can't walk into an LKQ without spending $500 on a motor. Meanwhile, the rest of the yards are $200 or $100 on half off day.
Right.
So Miatas are non-existent in the yards now.
Of course not.
Miata motors are worse. And we came across the swap, and as a user, they were everywhere and reliable. They made good power, and you could literally walk into any junkyard across the country and probably find a good motor.
Yeah, the internet said they made like over 4.5 million of these things.
Yeah, littering the country, which is great because I never have to work too hard at finding a replacement motor. So from there, I've done a little bit of Champ Car. So I've been to Ozarks, an amazing track out in Missouri. If you ever get the chance, definitely go. It takes 2 hours to learn the course where you feel like you know what the next turn is that's coming, and probably another 2 hours to really start to pick up pace.
That's NASA Nationals location this year. So
it should be exciting. I'm sure it will eat a fair number of cars. We definitely saw a fair share of that while it was there. But if you ever get the chance, it's a serious roller coaster. There's so much elevation change. There's not a dull moment. Mm-hmm. You almost don't feel like you have a chance to breathe in that roughly 4-mile track. It's something else. Where the only other track that's longer in North America is Road America, and you feel like you have all the time in the world between corners to tighten your belts, get a drink of water, and then set up for the next turn for the most part.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I did Grid Life. I went to Midwest Fest and competed in GLTC. I was comfortably mid-pack and with some car issues. My limited slip clutch type beer can shimmed Lemons differential it was going to turn into an open that weekend. Had some cooling issues, had a baffle break in my oil pan. So by Sunday, the last session, motor started knocking. So it was fun up front and got progressively worse as the weekend went on. But again, that was a $100 junkyard motor that owed me nothing.
So, okay. So you've put this engine through its paces, right?
Mm-hmm.
So far, what does it get you? What are the benefits of going Ecotec?
So it's kind of this easy to manage motor. There's lots of different things that you can do with it. At the entry level, it makes about 165 wheel horsepower as a stock motor with a semi-aggressive but safe tune on a reflashed GM ECM. And we provide that in wire harnesses if you buy a wire harness from us, or if you just straight up send it in ECM, we'll reflash it for you. But that's where it starts. 165, 170 horsepower, 165, 170 foot-pounds of torque. And because it's VVT on both cams, you get a very full torque band. It's everything that you hate about it makes up for all the things that you hate about the Miata motor, in that it has torque and you're not going to get stuffed in the corner, and you can climb your way back out, even though you're only making 165 horsepower. And then from there, the sky's kind of the limit, similar to what you can do with a K series. It's just not as well documented. And there's a couple reasons why for that. And it has to do with who's using this and has pioneered this motor, which is your typical dirt track, circle track guys that never want to share any kind of information with anybody. They think that they're sitting on a mountain of gold. And in some ways they are. There's a guy out of Illinois that rebuilds these motors, MWR, and he's got your sprint car engines making upwards of 300 horsepower on meth injection. So without any porting, without any even touching the interior to that engine, just cams, pistons, and induction. So obviously ITBs and methanol.
So we might have dropped the lead a little bit here, but I mentioned you're the Ecotec entrepreneur in your intro, and you told us that you sell this stuff, but what's your website? Let's talk about that real quick, just so they know where to find you and what stuff is going on.
Yeah. So our website is ecotecmiata.ca. I own the .com as well, but this is originally a Canadian company that I bought back in October. I have a great relationship with the previous owner, and I approached him kind of last year just to sell a hydraulic throwout bearing clutch slave kit that I had developed for myself, and then tested and found that I could sell it on Marketplace to other Ecotec users, and then discovered that even the K Miata guys can benefit from it. It's very simple to install and uses the factory master. But I approached him because I wanted to put it up on his website so I could start, hopefully getting some more business with it. And he was down for that. But in that conversation, he quickly asked me, he said, I've been thinking about selling the company, and you were the first person I thought of. And I kind of, if somebody could hear my jaw hit the floor, I was not expecting that in the conversation. And I said, well, okay, what would that look like? And had several discussions around that. And then 9 months later, he finally caved to me and sold me the company. And that was last October, like I said. So that's where all of the new latest parts that I've been putting onto the website, making improvements onto what the products are that were originally part of the swap kit, and adding more content there so I can continue the community, because I do feel that this is a great option for anybody who's got a Miata that's looking for a little bit more horsepower, but not a ton more cost, and then wants to experiment with going a little bit faster and, maybe adding some cams, putting in a standalone ECM and making some more power.
Yeah. So what I've heard so far is pretty interesting, right? So you're going to come out of the gate with 165 horsepower. That's better than the Miata had, right? At least the
Sure.
NANBs. So, but then you can upgrade them, similar to all the engines that are out there. I don't think there's an engine out there you can't start modifying, right?
Right.
But one thing I read was that the weight of this engine is very similar to the native Miata engine, and so it helps keep that balance in the car.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, I weighed it without a flywheel, but basically within race trim. So just an alternator, water pump. So the only thing that's run by the serpentine belt is the alternator. Mm-hmm. The weight of the motor with a factory oil pan is 275 pounds. And it is a short motor. It is very compact. The The balance shafts are mid block, so they're above the crank, I believe. And it's very easy to modify, make an oil pan for, and then stuff it underneath the hood of a tiny car.
Mm-hmm.
The swap doesn't require any cutting of the subframe, the stock subframe, or of the hood or the firewall. So it fits in a very tight space.
Okay. And so you talked about hitting the junkyards and finding motors. What version of the Ecotec are most people looking for?
So out of the gate, I would say the number one motor that my customers are swapping into their cars is the 2.4 LE5 or LE9. That's the GM motor designation. It's VVT, and it's got the biggest factory cams out of any of the motors. Aside from that, there's a 2.2 liter L61.
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely popular with like the Circle Track guys. And then there's a 2 liter turbo that came in a like Cobalt SS's and Saab 93s too, actually.
Yeah, so that motor's everywhere.
Mm-hmm. The plan is actually to do some experimentation with the 2.0 turbo, either from a Cobalt SS. There's a direct injection version that I'm actually hoping to pick one up this weekend, and then or a Saab 93, because they're everywhere. You can find them in just about every junkyard. It's kind of amazing, and they will take stock with maybe a slightly larger turbo from the 2.0 LNF. They can make 350, 400 horsepower on junkyard parts.
So, okay. And you said you were like a half off day. You were getting engines for 100, $200 at a shop.
Yeah. So I like to watch, there's a particular junkyard in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Lucky's that I love to go on their half off day. I think the last time we went and grabbed 2 motors same day, they said bring in $25 worth of canned food, because they were doing some kind of food drive for homeless people or something like that. So I'm in there testing motors, and my racing team currently, and it probably will be until he's done racing, is my dad and my uncle and my best friend. And my best friend and I are probably the hot shoes on the team, but I can't do it without. At this point, I don't want to race without my dad. It's kind of this special thing for me and for him, and so I'm enjoying every single one of those days. But I've dragged him into the junkyard for a couple of engine pulls, and his contribution was grabbing the soup cans before we pulled 2 motors out. But yeah, that was an interesting day. There's not many ways you can actually test a junkyard motor effectively, because they don't let you bring in car batteries. You can't get them to. There's maybe a little bit of fuel in the fuel rail, but you're not going to be able to do a compression test. So instead, what I figured out is that I can bring in a Milwaukee tire inflator, a 5-gallon Circle Track tank, and a leak down tester. And we leak down test all the cylinders on all of our race motors, quote, big air quotes, race motors. And the last 2 motors that I pulled had 5% leak down across all 8 cylinders. And so we were pretty satisfied with that.
Okay. So I've got a NANB Miata. I've got it's still running. I've got a hankering to do some crazy stuff with it. I can go and get this 2.4 liter. Seems like a nice big block to be putting in these NANB Miatas. Mm-hmm. What do your kits offer? And then what can I do to compete with the K series? Because K series accidentally make 200 horsepower.
Yeah. So the kits, well, there's a couple, I offer a couple different kits. There's a racer kit, which was originally designed to satisfy chump car rules, where it's a certain dollar value and a certain horsepower limit and all of that based on point system that I don't fully understand. And I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but the racer kit comes with the engine mounts, the oil pan, and essentially the transmission adapter and flywheel adapter. And if you don't spring for the billet flywheel, which I recommend most of my customers do, and it's not just selfishly, it's a much better setup. Lighter weight spins better. It's also it's just a much more hardy design than what is actually still in my car. I'm going to be the last person to get all the upgrades. And that is taking a flex plate from an automatic, which just about every one of these motors is automatic when you first pull it, an aluminum adapter, what we call a puck, and then a Miata flywheel that gets re-drilled to the Ecotec crank bolt pattern. And you sandwich that with some ARP bolts and then stick a Miata clutch on that, and Miata transmission comes together, and it's great. With that, you need to source all your own bolts, build your own wire harness, and then figure out your engine management. And so it's the low cost entry level option for a lot of guys. And there's still a lot of racers that want to do it that way. And then they can add on. They can go and get our cooling kit, which comes with all silicone hoses and an air intake kit. If they don't want to source all those parts themselves, they can add on the bolts if they want to, or they can just buy the complete swap kit, which comes with all the bolts, all the hardware, all the gaskets, the intake. And then from there, that's your entry power level, right? So you're making, let's call it 165, 170 horsepower out to 6,500 RPM. And this engine kind of gets a bad rap. They call it a truck motor because it kind of sounds like one a little bit. And the reason for that is GM put a massively undersized exhaust cam and exhaust port in these heads. And that was so that they could, do all their emissions testing or pass all the emissions requirements and everything else. Creatively, and I don't know this for 100% certainty, but I couldn't find evidence of it anywhere else on the internet. I believe that I was the first person to put an intake cam on the exhaust side. So where Miata guys like to take the exhaust cam and put it on the intake side because it gives you a little bit more lift, the intake cam on a 2.4 Ecotec is more duration, and a lot more lift than the exhaust side. And you'll gain pretty easily 20 horsepower with that and extend your RPM range and almost cough up no bottom end to the car because of how choked the exhaust side of this car, the exhaust side of this motor actually is.
Mm. Okay. And what about porting those heads?
It's kind of the small block Chevy approach. Like you got to kind of know what you're doing with a dual overhead cam motor, but as long as you raise the roof on it, do a little bit of catch the low hanging fruit, I think you can pick up pretty easily 5-10 horsepower, depending on, what cams you're using and everything else. I've not yet run a ported head. I'm still kind of a lemons guy in that I want to be able to swap everything over if we blow up the motor at the track, because if it's early in the weekend, we got another 10 hours of racing ahead of us. And having 2 fully built motors is doable, but who's got the time for all of it? And I'm a DIY guy, so it comes down to that. Or there's a couple different people out there. Category 5 Portworks. His name's Josh Billheimer. He does a phenomenal job with porting heads, and he knows a lot about the Ecotec. He does a phenomenal job, and I talk to Josh regularly. I just haven't ponied up the coin yet to go get a ported head, which feels a little bit wrong in the whole sense of the spirit of lemons to some extent. But I think I'm probably going to outgrow that here to some degree, and maybe try some other series long term.
Yeah, and being in the business you need to try to push the envelope a little bit, because there's knuckleheads like me who would do that just for the heck of it. I mean, if I'm buying $100, $200, $300 motors, like, why not have a couple on hand? Yeah. I'd get at that price, I'd get bored with my own Dremel tool and start whacking off stuff. Like, just
I've done it. I just haven't run it yet. There's a very, let's call it, ridiculous head sitting out in my garage right now that was a direct injection head that I made port fuel injection that has been hand ported, and I've got some interesting things sitting in the intake port to try and increase velocity, and it's an interesting one that I'm very tempted to try here soon. But I kind of want to grow incrementally in my time, right? Especially now with having the company and having to like change things around, but also be ready for the next, 16-hour race. And my team's all yelling at me for increasing power and decreasing reliability and certain things like that. So it's almost like I need to build up a race motor, a spicy motor as it is, and then try that in between the endurance motor. But the endurance motor is still pretty spicy. I've got some specific cams that are designed to kind of top out at 7,500 RPM. There's a caveat to this motor, and much like any other modern 4-cylinder that has balance shafts, there becomes a certain RPM where the balance shafts become a liability. And anything above 7,500 RPM, especially once you hit 8,000, the balance shafts like to leave the chat and eject out the side of the block. However, in an endurance sense, when you take those balance shafts out, it causes those native harmonics that are always there inside of the motor to come out into the rest of the car. You see this, I know, a lot on K motors. They're super buzzy, and bolts start to vibrate loose. Things start to break. And I experienced this myself when I pulled the balance shafts out and went to an electric water pump because I was promised 30 more horsepower. That's not the case at all. We tested it on a chassis an engine dyno, and the most we got at 7,500 RPM, almost $8,000, was 7 horsepower. So anybody who tells you take the balance shafts out for a whole lot more power, at least it's not that effective in an Ecotec. I can't say what the effect is in a K, but for me, it's not worth the risk or the added vibrations when I'm in the car for 2 hours.
Yeah, I can attest as someone who deletes K-series balance shaft oil pumps. They shake a lot more. Just saying. So, okay, let's talk about what you got a Miata and you're ready to do the swap. Maybe you're feeling spicy and rich and you buy like 3 of these engines just because you could, and you're looking to do the swap. Okay. I'm going to assume most people who are doing the swap aren't street Miata kids, or maybe they're canyon carvers at a minimum, but I would definitely think this is a more track oriented swap, and it's just on the budget side, right?
Yeah, I would say the majority of customers are in that group, HPDE or full on race cars. Most of them, if they're a race car, are probably endurance because this motor does so well. It sips on the fuel because if you leave it mostly stock, you can get more than 2 hours out of a tank of fuel, and that's kind of the threshold based on what racing series you're running. Lemons doesn't have a limit. You can run a 24-gallon fuel cell in the car if you want. That kind of upsets the balance of a Miata. But I run a 14-gallon stock tank with mods to get to that level. And I'm with my cams and everything, I'm probably pushing hour and 45 if I get a couple yellows in a long race. But I think it's accessible. I think it's more accessible than a lot of other swaps out there because it maintains a lot of Miata components. So we don't need, if you leave the stock long block, and I haven't tested with a stock radiator in my car just because I had a Mishimoto prior to this because the BPs like to run hot. So I just didn't feel the necessity to go to a smaller radiator, but they will run a stock factory Miata radiator, plastic end caps, thin core, and then Miata flywheel, Miata clutch, pressure plates. You don't have to cut the subframe at all because the oil pan and engine clear that in the hood. So it's pretty. I think if you feel comfortable pulling a motor on a car, you could definitely do this swap. It's very user friendly. I think it just probably hasn't caught on that way because of I'm not actually sure.
Well, so okay, if you can, the way you're setting it up, I'm going to assume these motor mounts are bolt-in, not weld-in, right?
Correct.
Okay. You're retaining a bunch of the Miata stuff for the car.
Yep.
What about accessories? So like power steering, stuff like that. Is that all Miata power steering still, or do we need adapters or anything?
So that we offer a kit that works with the GM power steering pump. That's factory, uses factory brackets and basically some custom hoses. And that it's on our website. And then it basically plumbs right into the factory rack. We even have an air conditioning kit. You have to use the power steering kit if you're going to do air conditioning. I think that I have yet to sell an air conditioning kit. Most people don't care.
Right.
And I don't know how many the previous owner sold to customers, but it was definitely not a high runner. But yeah, it's a complete kit from that standpoint.
Are we using the Miata throttle body, or what are we doing?
No, that is the one. That is the one caveat, is that you're using the GM. And there are options. There's a drive-by-wire and a drive-by-cable throttle body. So if you wanted to use, I'm not actually sure what standalone you would potentially use if you wanted to use a drive-by cable and still use the VVT. But there's definitely some options to do. There's non-VVT heads out there that's like on the 2.2 liter L61 head. And actually there's some off the shelf competition cam drop in spicy cams, extreme, whatever their moniker is, cams that'll drop into that cylinder head, and then you can run a drive-by cable. I'm kind of on the fence whether I like drive-by cable. I've seen some, not in specifically Ecotec Miatas, but cars that use kind of aftermarket drive-by cable, throttle bodies, either them breaking. I know that the Skunk 2 throttle bodies love to break. And I've seen guys with ITBs that snap open and they can't, they don't realize that their, good friend of mine, Bronson McNeamer with his ITB LS swapped NB Miata had his throttle body stick wide open and could have gotten really hurt. So I like to push customers towards drive-by-wire. And what that ends up meaning is that you have to take the OEM gas pedal out and then weld in a drive-by-wire, very simple operation. Not everybody has a welder, but everybody knows somebody with a welder, generally speaking. And that pedal assembly, you just basically weld on a drive-by-wire throttle accelerator pedal from essentially a Cadillac CTS or a Corvette C5. And every junkyard's got a Cadillac CTS in it. That's where mine came from. Very simple install. And then you got the opportunity to kind of position the pedal however you want. Make it easier for heel toe instead of having to put a plate on there or something like that, which is common for Miatas.
Mm-hmm. So I buy the kit. I don't really need to go searching for radiators and stuff. What I need to go get a CTSV pedal. What's coming in the kit?
So in the kit, you're getting in a full kit where it's closest thing that you're going to get to a turnkey is we'll work from the back of the motor. You get the transmission adapter. Mm-hmm. You get our chromoly billet flywheel, mm-hmm. The engine mount kit, which comes with the bushings and everything else. The cooling system hoses and an air intake kit. We'll leave the options open for what you want to do for a wire harness. We can provide you with a wire harness. It's a separate fee, but we like to try and make this as entry level because there's lots of people that say, "Oh, I know how to build a wire harness." It's funny that I'm saying this because I just listened to your podcast about AIM and those guys and being adverse to wiring. I am not the wiring guy. I definitely I have someone that builds wire harnesses for me. It's a great supplier. He's a good partner. And he does a phenomenal motorsport level, esque harness. It's not quite to the level that's something you would see in IMSA, but it's not Raychem, but it's very good construction. And so highest quality that I would be comfortable racing. And you get an ECM if you buy a wire harness.
Okay.
So with that original kit, you get everything to physically put the motor into the car. And then we leave it up to you how you want to address the electronics. We give you all the wire harness diagrams so that it makes it easy. They're color coded and you can understand very quickly. I've got one customer that's soon to be picking up their kit. Actually wants to drive out and meet me and get the kit. They live in Michigan and they're right now building their own wire harness and documenting it on YouTube. So that journey for them is going to be documented. I'm pretty interested to see how that turns out for them.
So I'm on the website and I see you're selling ARP 2000 Ecotec rod bolts. Are those necessary?
On a stock motor, no. Especially if you're not spinning the 6500. I'm not sure that I would say that they're absolutely necessary for me spinning to 7,500 RPM, but it is very much an added insurance for if you accidentally over rev this motor. And I have over revved this motor before, and so have a lot of other people. And in the middle of the race, and not blown it up, not money shift-esque, where you kind of get into it and then you pull your foot out. But that motor has definitely exceeded 8,000 RPMs briefly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of that added insurance. It's kind of a additional peace of mind, and it's a simple thing to do, especially if you're already pulling the oil pan off and putting on the swap pan.
Yeah. I think it's a good peace of mind insurance thing, especially if you're going to the track. If you drive in anger, those, pedal slips, almost over revvy type situations happen often. So
Every race, at least once.
yeah, at least once. So the other thing I see, is the Ecotec intake manifold, and it looks kind of spicy. Have we dynoed this yet?
Yes. And I think there's some dyno charts on our website that are kind of underneath that. And there's some details about that. So there are a couple different configurations. Now, everyone wants to talk about bolt-ons. This bolt-on gives you this amount of horsepower. That bolt-on's going to give you another 10, 15 horsepower. Your stickers add 5. This is a system, and we really have to kind of approach every engine like it's an engineering problem. And I'm an engineer by nature, so forgive me if I lose somebody here. I'm going to try and keep it as interesting as possible. But if you put an intake on, but you don't change the cams and you don't change the exhaust manifold at all, you'll make a little bit more power. And that's kind of what's detailed in, you won't lose any power for sure in this motor. It's kind of wild. I expected to see some losses down low. Really what ended up happening is we extended the range of that motor into closer to 7,000 RPMs. And then when I did the double intake cam swap, it was like we had just found the golden nugget of inexpensive, cheap modifications. And this intake manifold that we're offering now wasn't something that I experimented with until I found one actually secondhand on a marketplace. And I haven't seen one since, but this was for a dune buggy sandrail car that was a nice piece. A friend of mine said, hey, you should go buy this. And I kind of backtracked it to the quote, the manufacturer, the sandrail company that was selling them. And he said, yeah, we don't sell those anymore. Hey, who made these for you? Do you make these or did somebody else? No, a guy out of Ohio made them for us. I actually tracked that guy down and he's making them for me now. He does a phenomenal job. You don't want me welding aluminum. I'm not the guy for that. There's much more skilled people for that. And he's, but I collaborate with him. I tell him what I want, and we've had some pretty good success with this. And it's really there to extend that range of the Ecotec because we've shortened the runners to about 6 inches. And that's to do with organ pipe theory. Again, now I'm going to go down I don't want to stop me when I go down the engineering too far, but that organ pipe theory basically allows you to ram more air in on the second harmonic so that you get a better intake charge with a shorter runner. And that's what we saw. As soon as we added more cam and actually more exhaust cam, because this thing was choked, the thing wanted to come alive. There's another company that makes a lot of performance parts that we, for the Ecotec, that we went to their dyno on, and I was kind of showcasing our standalone, which isn't featured on the website, but if you reach out to us, I can get you steered in the right direction for that. I don't want to go too much more detail of that because of certain 3-letter agencies that I don't want necessarily banging on my door. They were impressed with how much the motor just wanted to continue to go on basically stock components. We went to a junkyard and pulled a $20 cam resulted in 20 horsepower. It was phenomenal.
So perusing the website, I now have another question because I don't think we addressed it in the kit, and we haven't talked about it yet. I don't think. What exhaust manifold are we using? Because you talked about the exhaust side needing to be more spicy, but what manifolds are we using for this?
There's a couple different options out there. Okay. The most common, I would say, is probably the designation is, or the company that makes it, or the company that markets it, I should say, is 1320. It's a Polaris slingshot motor. It's a ram horn style exhaust manifold. And I've run that. I have lots of customers that pick that because it's the easy button, gives you a 2.5-inch out exhaust, and you can actually cut it a little bit higher, and you can put like a 3-inch V-band on there and then run that out the back. And it does well. It does well at the high end, and it's anywhere between, depending on which version. There's 2 versions of it, version 1 and then version 2, which they say is a thicker tubing, more turbo setup. I'm not sure I'd want to run a turbo on this, but on that manifold. But it's like $250, I think. Maybe that price has gone up with inflation, but I remember it being kind of around $250. And again, low cost, highly effective, and it's got 2 O2 bungs in it already, so you can put a wide band in and run the narrow band for closed loop fueling. Yeah, it's pretty simple setup.
Okay. Yeah. I just looked it up. So it's actually a really compact ram horn setup. I guess it was meant to go in the slingshot. So
yes. Did I say I think I said Polaris slingshot. I'm not sure if I said that or Solstice.
Yeah, you did. It just I didn't realize how tight the engine bay was going to be for the slingshot. So when I saw the picture of it, I was like, wow, that's pretty small.
Yeah. And it affords you the ability to get some runner length without having to try and squeeze it next to your engine mounts. And then if you buy the internal clutch slave kit, you can get a 3.5-inch pipe past that transmission firewall section that everybody laments trying to get exhaust through because the clutch slave is in the way.
Right. So, maybe we've covered it, but it's been a little spotty. So I want to hear what's a good basic build on this Ecotec for the track day junkie or the Lemons racer.
Sure. So I've seen it everywhere from, I've tried everything up to, reground cams, but not over 7,500 RPM. And the thing can actually make a ton more power above that if you start doing things like porting heads and stuff like that. The typical user is probably at 107. They're basic for Lemons. They want to keep their motors basic and they don't want to open them up because they're afraid that they're going to ruin something on that. But if a guy wanted to make 225 horsepower, he'd go into the junkyard, he'd find a good leak down 2.4. And if you want to be there all day, here's another quote secret that you can do. You take the cylinder head off and you throw it away. And then you go find a 2.2 motor, take that cylinder head, stick it on there, and then walk out of the yard. Order some comp cams and maybe bump the compression, port the exhaust, and you're making 220, 225, maybe 230 with that motor. I haven't done that quite yet because I want to keep kind of developing the VVT. I like that it doesn't sound super choppy because then people don't come around going, oh, what Cam do to his car? What did he do to his motor? He's got some kind of race motor in there. Kind of makes me a little bit of a sleeper because I can retard that exhaust cam timing and run it a little bit quieter and smoother. And then when we get out on the track and we're above 3,000 RPM, 4,000 RPM, that's when the thing starts to open up with, phasing the cams and getting it to all run off from the ECM. But you can go so far as to get Kinsler ITBs and run E85 and get up into the 250s. You can have a head ported by someone that knows preferably someone that knows what they're doing, and then really make a lot of power and a lot of torque at a lower RPM than typically shows up for competing motors, is what I found.
Okay. I mean, it really does sound like I don't know, that podcasts, stick around forever once they're recorded, but the kit that you're offering seems pretty reasonable price wise. Mm-hmm. Obviously, these engines are really affordable. And then the add-on accessories that you're not offering that are just out there, like the header, and then go to the junkyard, pick this up, pick that up. It feels like a really cheap way to get a lot more power, or at least a lot more torque than a Miata's used to. And it's really got to wake that car up.
Yeah, it does. And you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier that the weight of this motor is close. Like I said, it's 200. Mm-hmm. It's within 30 pounds of a 1.8 Miata motor. So I don't know. I couldn't tell the difference the first time I drove it on track at Gingerman. It still felt like a Miata. It just felt like I had so much more power and torque, and I could, kind of walk the car around corners and, throttle, kind of modulate the throttle around corners rather than having to be full on, full off, more Miata style, carry every last ounce of speed that you could through there. This gives you the option to kind of like make up for some of those entry speed mistakes, and definitely on the exit you can pick up a lot more speed because of that. And it's inexpensive. That's why I went with that. That's why I picked the Ecotec originally, when I was just a user. Mm-hmm. I saw what else was out there, the other options. There's a J swap, there's a K swap, you can LS swap it, but really the cost of those kits was so much more compared to what my budget was. And everybody's got a budget, whether we like to admit it or not. And I've definitely taken mine probably too far. Don't tell my wife. And it's exciting to me that my targets are different than a lot of other people's. I don't know how familiar you are with Gingerman Raceway. It's kind of become this, because of grid life, it's kind of become a bit of a mecca for, how fast is your car? Mm-hmm. My objective with this car is to keep it as cheap performance parts wise as possible and run 245 Hankook RS4s and go sub 140. That's my objective. I want to do it on the slowest tires with the least amount of cash invested into the performance of the car and improve my driving. Obviously, everybody needs to improve their driving. We all suck. So that's kind of been the goal of this. And I haven't hit that yet, but I am high 140, 141 on RS4s. And so I'm in the hunt. We've done a couple things over the winter. I shaved 40 thousandths off from the cylinder head. So I haven't done anything to the exhaust port yet. That's probably next, but I want to see how much more power we're going to make on the dyno. Because the last trip to the dyno, and I think I'm going to post this on my Instagram so that you can link to it later. But the last trip to the dyno, on piston rings that were starting to give up, and you could hear it when it started on the compression and everything. We made 195 wheel horsepower and a crap ton of torque. And that video's online, I think on my YouTube. It's certainly on the Facebook page, Ecotec Miata, and inside the Ecotec Miata Facebook groups, which is a phenomenal resource for anybody who wants to ask a bunch of questions and go for kind of a Q&A. It's a great community. Everybody tries to help each other out. Much like I kind of keep my eye on the K-Swap group too. One, because the internal clutch slave kit actually helps them out. I think to date, I've got more K-Swap users than I do actual Ecotec users with this particular part. It's kind of how I got my start. And it's just been, kind of an interesting ride to promote this engine. And I don't want to go too much further without mentioning he's a partner in a sense of development. His name's Matt Burt. He owns a company called BMEP, Brake Mean Equals Pressure Solutions. And Matt is my ECM guy. And I won't call him a tuner. He does my tuning, but he is not a tuner. He is he's a calibration engineer. And he's also an Ecotec user. He's got it in a Pontiac Solstice. I think he swapped it into his wife's Jeep. She wasn't too thrilled with that, but because there's a commonality with bell housings, there's I think the Pontiac, it's the Pontiac Solstice bell housing will swap onto it's an AR5 transmission. So it's got that Ishin commonality. And so there's a way to get it to a Jeep transmission. It kind of blows my mind how much swappability there is between some of those things. But the other thing that we've been working on, and I'm about to put on my car, and we're going to go to the dyno and test it. He did street testing, is some drive-by-wire ITBs, and very inexpensive. We like to do things very crowd-friendly, let's put it that way. And so these ITBs are motorcycle ITBs. They're on the bigger side. And we haven't tested it, so I can't say what the horsepower gains are going to be, if any, because runners are typically smaller, but they breathe really well. They're designed well for this application, and they're drive-by-wire. There's a map sensor integrated into it, and I can still pull vacuum off it so I can run my brake booster, because screw manual brakes over a 2-hour period inside of the car, racing corner to corner. So I want to keep make it easier on me and some of my drivers. And so I want to eventually, after I've tested it, I want to bring that to the community and make it accessible to them. Now, some of these things require a standalone. And I mentioned we have that standalone. It's actually plug and play with the GM harness. And so if you've upgraded and you want to upgrade your Ecotec Miata, we have a plug and play ECM solution. So you don't have to chop it off, repin it for a Haltech or anything like that. And it's considerably more cost effective than a Haltech. And it's well supported, and it's OEM quality. So it's not going to brick, burn to the ground. It protects itself from backfed voltage and everything else. And there's very, very little you can't do with this actual ECM. And Matt and I support that pretty strongly.
Awesome. I have one last question that I forgot to ask when we got to it. But you said there's an oil pan kit that comes with your kit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that baffled already?
It does come with a baffle. Yep. I don't feel confident enough that I would want customers going out there without it. You really need 6 quarts of oil in these cars at least that's my comfort level. And the sump has to be large enough to accommodate for that. And when you start putting over a G worth of load, sideways load, if you put aero on your car, or big sticky tires, you're going to need baffles in there. Now, one of the things that I did when I got the company was I knew the things that I didn't like about my swap, and I listened to a lot of complaints from other users, and that was the biggest thing. That was the shortcoming on this swap was the oil pan. It's worked in the past. It just doesn't last forever because it's a welded steel pan that's been folded and laser cut and then hand welded. And sometimes the welding isn't, super high quality. I had another one made before I owned the company I had professionally TIG welded, and it still kind of leaks at the back of the motor. It's not my favorite. Let's put it that way. And I did some things to upgrade it and make it a little bit better so that we could, not leak or crack or do some things like that. But it's kind of it was the Achilles heel of this kit. I took the approach of no more welding. There will be no more exterior welds on this oil pan. But I wanted to keep the price as affordable as possible. And so I took it from the approach of let's make an adapter. Let's take an off-the-shelf stamped steel pan that somebody else did the engineering work on, because I don't have finite elemental analysis, and what we can do is pretty limited inside of SolidWorks or Fusion 360. But I don't have the ability to stamp things, and stampings are super cheap and very, very accessible online. So if you then break that piece of the oil pan, you just go to Rock Auto or Amazon and you get a new one. Mm-hmm. So I kind of shopped around and found the pan that I liked, bought a couple different ones, filled them up with water to measure the capacity, and then picked one, and then started taking a whole bunch of measurements. So effectively what I did was I made a 1-inch piece of aluminum, beautifully machined out by a guy out in California. So I was able to find a source for the machine work stateside. And I'm not going to say that I'm huge, USA manufacturing. I need to keep one eye on that, but also an eye on affordability for all my customers. So I looked overseas, and I found this particular individual that had great reviews. I found a service called mfg.com. So if you have parts that you want to source out, that's a great resource. You can put your parts on there, put your CAD designs and a technical drawing on there, and people will bid on it. They'll basically give you what their price is in certain quantities and all sorts of things. So I found this guy, and he's been great to work with. And I have these beautiful billet oil pans now that a stamped steel oil pan bolts up to, or sump. I use a modified but off the shelf pickup tube from another vehicle. It's got a Viton O-ring in there. We kind of over engineered that piece of it so that it wouldn't leak or cavitate or suck air in and then blow your motor up. So I worked on that with a good friend of mine who's an aerospace engineer and a racer and everything else. So we really took that piece of it seriously. I wanted this to be a huge step forward in the reliability of the kit and to make customers feel like they had invested something that they could trust. And then there's some aluminum baffles that are laser cut, bent, and then rubber baffle trapdoors that flow, really well. Another guy that does a swap kit for MR2s, actually. I saw that on his website, asked him about it. So I found those. He said they've had really good luck with those. So I've really kind of tried to take as much of a communal learning and build a better product. A lot of it was my idea to start, but I know that the best designs are where you can work with other people, bounce ideas off, and then come out with a superior product. And I truly think that that's what we've done.
That's awesome. If I were a Miata person, this is probably the direction I would be looking, to be honest, because I like to tinker too much, and it gives you flexibility to get it done, but also do it your way. So
yeah, it is every bit of that, and I totally understand the addiction of that. I'm constantly bouncing ideas off from a couple different people. Previous owner, like I said, we're still good friends, and he wants to see this succeed. And he's a phenomenal race engineer. He's a very gifted engineer in that respect. And there's some new products that he didn't launch quite yet that are still kind of in the development phases that I'm hoping to bring to market. Maybe some different transmission options, maybe ones that with 8 gears in them. And then Matt Burt, I can't say enough good things about that guy. He's always up for listening to my shenanigans and shooting some of it down because he's a pragmatic engineer. But how do we do this double intake cam swap? What do you think that's going to afford? And he's pretty gifted in the sense that I can bounce those ideas off, and he's within 5 horsepower usually of what we're going to make with the motor, barring everything's healthy. But yeah, it's exciting. The tinkering aspect of it. I'm hoping to launch a new chassis this year, hopefully at the end of next year, to kind of expand that ecosystem, and and then have other options for people that have cars that are kind of anemic and looking for a motor that's not going to launch itself on the track or just street driving it.
Right.
I don't know if I want to let too much out of the bag, but I'm excited about
this a little bit. So let's, I wouldn't let it out right now.
Okay.
Just keep that.
Yeah.
Keep that in your pocket for now. Maybe we'll try to vote on it.
Yeah. I'd love to see what everybody thinks. I've got, I've explored a couple different chassis options, and the other one that I initially, more expensive option, they're getting less expensive by the day, but the Ecotec fits in there phenomenal. Like, you don't got to cut anything. It clears the steering rack, won't touch the firewall. Even without moving the transmission, I think I just have to kind of bump the hood out a little bit because of how far they push the transmission forward. And if anybody kind of knows what I'm talking about, that's not the one I'm trending towards right now, because I think that chassis is pretty well served today, but maybe somebody would like a 300 horsepower turbo Ecotec in that car, and we'll do that eventually. But for now, you just have to wait and see. I'm pretty excited about it. There's lots of different options for this new chassis that I'm hopefully going to be picking up this weekend, or maybe next weekend. We'll see.
So before we wrap up, we're going to do our last segment for 2025. It's new. I want to hear what your favorite racer excuse is.
I don't have any brakes. There's no brakes. It's a common one, especially in endurance racing, because you kind of look at your brake pads and you go, yeah, that's probably enough to get through the rest of this race. We won't swap those pads. And it's funny because it always happens to my buddy, my best friend, he ends up finishing out the day, and I'm like, yeah, we're not going to put another set of pads on there. It's usually the rears. Sometimes it's been the fronts, and that's been pretty sketchy.
Oh, yeah.
But he comes over the radio all the time, just cussing at me. Cam, you bastard! I can't believe you didn't put pads on this car. And then he goes and sets his fastest lap.
Yep.
And it comes in. It's sorry.
Yeah, brakes slow you down. They don't make you faster.
Yeah, it's funny. That happened to my uncle, and he came over the radio, said the same thing, and I was standing in front of this old salty SCCA racer who's a good friend, and he doesn't even look up to make eye contact with me. He's picking at his thumbnail and says, all brakes do is slow you down, and says nothing else. I'm just dead. I'm just rolling on the ground. Now, I will say, if you've spiced up your car, good brake pads and good caliper sizing is so important. I try and not make that mistake anymore. And I want to make sure that all my drivers feel safe in the car. But it is my favorite excuse, bar none.
Awesome. Well, Cam, it's really nice to have you on the podcast, man. You're welcome anytime, and maybe we'll catch up with each other in person.
Yeah, it would be great. Maybe we'll get you into an Ecotec.
Miata. Oh, no.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.